All right, guys, just because it is useful to know, how many people consider themselves ops people? Dev people? QA? Release engineers? Yeah! All right, thanks, guys. Okay, so a little bit about me. I'm an infrastructure engineer at Demand Media. I've always been in support or operations roles, so I actually was in the help desk answering phone calls about an ISP. Or I've been running websites or running core infrastructure for UCR for a long time. I've been using Puppet since 2008, more importantly for those of you that have been around a while, 0.24.7. So I've been through the pain. I know what it was like to switch to go through all the various aspects of the change from 2.6 to 2.7. It wasn't fun, but it's been a blast. Finally, I work at Demand Media. We support sites like ehow.com, cracked.com, livestrong.com, creativebug.com, and then a whole slew of additional sites. So you can't have a discussion about testing without first understanding what the heck you're testing. So I really want to set a foundation of a role module or a profile module versus a library module. So Craig Dunn put together this wonderful blog post about this, talking about role and profile modules. And they're the modules that glue everything together. Then there's library modules. And he doesn't actually call them library modules, but they're the modules that you get off the forge. There's the HTTPD module. It's the MySQL module. It's the Mongo module. It's the things that you bring together that you're using role modules to actually compose. I'm going to draw those distinctions because you test them differently. I'm going to go out on a limb here. Ops people implicitly get testing. We really do. I mean, how many people that don't get testing would stand up a server to wake them up if tests didn't pass? Because that's all Nagios is, right? You have this test, and when it fails, a person or a computer wakes you up, and you walk to your computer grumbly and realize that it's not actually broken the way you thought it was, or the site's down, and you really should be brewing some coffee. So I think that as ops people, we really get testing as a fundamental thing. It's not, as I'll go into, I don't think that we necessarily understand it as well as we think we do sometimes. We try, and it is absolutely dumb. Like, you go to do Puppet testing of Puppet code, and it's like, this is stupid. Like, I could really just write a script that'll take my Puppet manifest and turn it into rspec-puppet, and hey, it works great, right? And really the problem is we start with a unit testing framework instead of an integration testing framework, and half of us don't even know what that means. I didn't when I started. And when you start out that way, you get really discouraged really fast, and you're just like, fuck it, I'm not gonna bother. So let's start with the types of testing. We all know Puppet parser validate. We know how to syntax check. Not that we all do it because you forget to run the command, but it's there. Especially if you're, my apologies to those that ran on Windows way early on. Yeah, you didn't even have it on your workstation. That's improved, but it wasn't there at the beginning. Linting. This is kind of an interesting concept that we as ops people haven't heard of. It's code style. It's, does your Puppet code look nice? Are you using, how many people have gone to so I'm just going to assume, because it makes me feel good, that everybody's using version control for their Puppet manifests. So for all of you that have a web interface to your version control system, how many of you have gone to it, opened up a manifest, and been like, what the fuck? Like, why is it doing this? That's what linting helps with. Like, it doesn't like tabs. You should use spaces. You should not go beyond 80 characters because God intended it to be limited to 80 characters. And I say that not as a true believer. Brian Cantrill is really credited for that line. So linting is style. Unit tests. It's testing basic stuff. In Puppet land, what that actually means for us is it means that we're testing what the catalog outputs. We're not testing whether it runs, whether the catalog does what we expect it to do. We're just looking at the catalog. By show of hands, have I lost anybody on when I'm talking about the catalog? Does everybody know what the catalog is? Okay, I'm seeing lots of nods. Anybody not know what the catalog is? Okay. So then there's integration testing. This is the stuff we actually wanted to do to begin with, because we're like, oh, I'm standing up system stuff. I want to test to make sure my system works. And rspec-puppet doesn't do that. That's dumb. Well, you learn really quickly when you get into some of this stuff that integration testing takes a long time. So if you can skip that and do things that will give you feedback faster, you don't need to move on to it. So we'll discuss that a bit more. Let's start with setting up our environment because, frankly, I want to give you things that you can walk away with. I want you to go home and actually have some code to play with. So really simple. Use the version of Ruby to test with that you're using in production. If you're running, Puppet 3.2 against Ruby 2 in production, you should probably be doing that on your workstation or wherever you're running your tests. Just like if you're running 1.8.7 in production, or heaven forbid someone's still crazy enough to be running 1.8.5, you should be running that on your workstation to test stuff. Because ideally you do this on your workstation because you can do it really fast. How many people use tmux or screen, just out of curiosity? Okay, cool. So you can just switch, you split the pane, switch real fast, test it, switch back, it's great. Okay, so gem-wise, you need Puppet, obviously, and use the version you're using in production. If you've got 2.7 deployed, just by show of hands, PE 2.8 customers, how many people are out there? Okay, just one. Puppet open source? Okay. Run the same version of Puppet open source that you're running out there or in production, run it locally. And then you need rspec-puppet is another gem, Puppet lint. I'll talk about what these do a little bit later. You can probably guess rspec-puppet gives you rspec. Puppet lint gives you Puppet lint. The spec helper gives you helper things. Okay. How many have seen this code? Like, this is the quintessential, we've all done it. In fact, it's called the trifecta on the actual cheat sheet. You have a package, you have a file, you have a service. They all kind of work together the same way. This should be, this is hello world for Puppet. We've all done this. And hey, we've got tests that do that test that, except really? Is that really useful? Is there anybody in this room that truly believes that I am wrong in saying that that really isn't all that useful? Didn't think so. Oh, okay, the one guy. Gotta be the one guy. Okay. To this day, I think that most of that isn't actually useful because, well, okay, so it's SSHD, so we actually care about the mode. But, most examples, we don't care. We just want to make sure Puppet has the service there. If we, for some reason, change one of those settings, it doesn't matter so much to us. Okay. So why doesn't it matter? Why is it so? Why do we look at that and implicitly think, oh, this is just dumb? I'm repeating myself. Because you talk to programmers oh, it's got to be dry. Yeah, I get it. That's why we don't like it. It's just, I could literally write I've got pro guys in the audience, I'm sure, that could literally write with one regex, something to just go one over. And it'd be like, whoa. So let's start and thinking about this. InfoSec comes in and says, you must do the following with SSH. You must permit root login to no, and we hate X11, so no X11 forwarding, because X11's bad. Obviously, they're not in an Oracle environment, but we won't talk about that. So let's add some useful tests. So we add a context. Normally, you use a context to change parameters or change facts, but it's also useful to give contextual information. These are InfoSec requirements. And is that pretty readable? It should contain a file that is SSHD config, and it should have this regex. My apologies to those that are used to the slashes. I just find this notation a bit easier when I'm working with Ruby because means that I don't have to escape as many characters. So we're testing for those two things. Permit root login, no. X11 forwarding. This actually looks useful. And fail. Okay, so first off, I just want to point out that I've snipped out the file contents, because when this prints out, you get this huge amount of output that actually gives the entire content of the template you just compiled. So it also becomes nice to make your templates a little shorter, which is better for compilation time, but we won't go there. So we can actually read from our failures that it's broken. It doesn't do what we said it's going to do. So who cares? Really? Why? And the answer is, I can now fix and validate that. I now have something that shows me I'm expecting this and I'm going to get this out. It becomes one more check and balance. If anybody's gone through the audit process, like, you've got some other external organization that comes in and audits you, yada, 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 this becomes one additional thing. It says, I'm using Puppet code to make sure this is this way across the board, and we are using these tests to make sure that it doesn't get changed in a way that we don't expect. The other thing is it gives you safety. You're gonna do stupid things. You're gonna make mistakes, and if by accident, you're using Vim and you go and replace some lines and comment some stuff out, and you set permit, because I want to say in rel, permit root login is default, yes. You comment out that line, hey, you just opened your stuff up really badly. This is going to catch it before it goes out into production. So let's use some operational examples. Things that aren't, contrived InfoSec stuff. Instead, they're contrived operational examples, because, getting real life examples is really difficult in slides, because it's just too much code on the screen. So we're going to start with the library module. I'm going to keep putting that up so that you guys can actually go pull it down. But I put this module up with the tests up on GitHub, so if you just want to reference it. So we've got a new requirement. We've got this really cool system that it sits here, and all of the systems around it SSH to it and drop shit on the box. So this is really cool if you're using, I think we were using, I don't remember the name, Cricket is the name of it. And what we would have happen is, so a lot of your monitoring software, that one box has access to everything. Well, we did it in reverse. That everything has access to the one box, and they SSH to the box and drop stuff. You learn really fast that as soon as you scale that, and hey, you've got Puppet, so you've set up NTP everywhere and it works, that SSH isn't configured to get SSH to one box like from 100 servers all at once. So we need to increase the max startups. So we make that change. We'll start with testing first, because it actually becomes an easy way to validate that, yes, we're doing what we want. And it becomes instantiated in our documentation. We now have this code that sits next to our Puppet documentation that helps to document what we expect things to do. We're testing our parameters. Oh, sorry guys, wrong button. Okay, so by default, max startup should be 10. And if I pass in this parameter, max startups of 40, I should have this line in my code. Really simple. And hey, it's only one line of code change. Well, it's 3 lines because you have to add the parentheses, but you get the idea. So I make the change. And, push it out, go do the Puppet run. And hey guys, did you happen to remember to update the template with that new variable? Because I forgot to. And I've done that so many times. You're just like, oh, oops. And how long did it take you? Because, first off, you're deploying to production because QA, what's that? I love talking to the guys that have the big environments. This is probably the first, being at Demand is probably the first time I've had those full-scale environments. I've always just, push it into production and you go to the box. Oh, crap. We'll fix that. So, did you test that? The other thing is I use the heck out of Vagrant to do this. So it's a Vagrant destroy and Vagrant up, and that takes a little bit of time. we want to increase the feedback loop. It takes actually, I don't remember now, I probably should have grabbed the metric, but it takes less than 5 seconds, it's probably less than 1 second to actually run through the tests and return back, hey, dummy, you forgot to go update your template. Yes, I'm that dummy, and yes, I've done this exact thing where it's like, oh, crap. So let's talk about the role, because the role is really where the magic happens. In my environment, you can have library modules, but the role module is what actually instantiates code on a box. It's what matters. It's the things that matter to the app. So I update my test code. Cool. I update my Puppet code. Hey, that works. And the tests don't work. This sucks. I'm really tired of this. There are some other things that come into play. What did we forget to deal with? Well, if I just updated the tests, I didn't tell my testing harness where to go get the dependent module, because we're now depending on the SSH module. So we do a little bit more setup. We're going to touch our rake file, deal with that rspec helper gem I said that you needed to deal with, and we're going to touch the .fixtures.yaml, and I'll explain what each of those are. So this is our new hotness. This is our old busted. And I say old busted, it works for a library module in general cases if you're not depending on other modules, because all you're doing is just iterating over a loop. Here, we're going to take, and Puppet Labs has done all of the actual hard work. We're just going to add this one line, and guess what? You now get also really cool things. Like you can just run rake lint, and it just works. You can run rake spec, and it will handle, if you have the .fixtures.yaml, it'll handle going and getting your dependent modules, checking them out as a fixture. Do you guys know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a fixture? Kind of guessing that you get it, but just in case you don't, a fixture is, it's there as basically to mock up the code. Like I can't compile a catalog without all the code, so I've got to have that fixture in place before I can compile all the code. So we go to GitHub and we pull down that SSH repository, and this is just a cheater line, which basically says, this is the module, create a symlink, and set up the source dir, or use what's there as my module. I also want to touch on fixtures for just a moment. If you're using stages and your code depends on stages, you're going to want to CD into spec fixtures manifests and modify the site.pp to mock up those stages as necessary, because it's important. If you're using stages in production, quite frankly, what was I saying earlier? Your code won't compile if all the code isn't there. Well, you need those stages as dependencies, so you'll need to mock those up. Okay, so let's get into some fun examples. This is my, really just to give people a hard time, because these are the things that catch me up. And by catching these examples, it actually it sped things up for me. By doing testing instead of finding them the other way, by debugging the crap out of things, it made my development go a lot faster. So we're standing up a Jenkins server because we like continuous delivery, right? And continuous integration. Okay, cool. So I build my tests. This one line is required, the spec helper, and it does some setup stuff. I don't think I've ever modified my spec helper file. I'm sure the GitHub guys that are doing some crazier stuff will give examples of why you would, but just know that it needs to be there. So we're describing the infra Jenkins module, or I'm sorry, the infra Jenkins class. We've got some basic facts that we need to set because, hey, we need to know what operating system we're on to install Java. We need to know, and it's always fun because there are so many different, how many people have run into this where you're using one module off the forge that uses OS family and one module that uses operating system, and it's like, guys, like really choose one. In reality, or my favorite is when you need both, which you see occasionally where it's like, okay, yes, this is a Red Hat variant. Okay, so now we're going to do this thing. So really simple. To get Jenkins up and running, we just need to have some Java and some Jenkins. Cool. Looks pretty simple, right? Anybody see anything wrong with that code? If Ryan's in the room, he'll see the error, but I think he's actually speaking at this time slot. So there's an absolute error on this, and what's broken is that sometimes you've got to do a fully qualified class name. So looking at that code again, by including Jenkins, it actually tries to include itself. If the fix to that is using : and it'll correct that. I spent half an hour trying to figure out what the bug was. I identified the bug right away, but trying to figure out what the bug was, I actually wasn't even able to find it. I had to, I just changed the names. I was going to call it something like, CI as my class name. And then, no joke, later that morning or the following day, Ryan tweeted about it. I'm like, oh, I get it now. And for reference, that's the bug. Okay, so this is going to be a really contrived example, but follow along with me, and I think it'll make sense. Okay, so we got some tests. My hope is that when you're reading these tests, they should be pretty easy to read, and you're just like, oh, okay, I get that. This is documentation of what that module should output. And just out of curiosity, is there anybody that's looking at that and going, that is just impossible to read, that doesn't make any sense? Anybody? Okay, cool. So we don't want to have the Node.js dev stuff. We want to have some app-specific stuff, really simple. And I probably should have called it infra app, but we're going to call it Node.js because for whatever reason, we seem to name apps, our internal apps, after the things they're based on. So cool. And we have a dev class because we need to be able to do development on it, which means I need that Node.js dev package to exist. Really simple. And notice, I'm not necessarily testing every bit of it because I'll show you in a while. We're going to use inheritance. So I can assume that by testing this is going to get tested because it's inherited. So cool. We set up some code. Really simple. And there's that fix again, guys. That was a really annoying bug. And because I've been around for way too long, the only way you used to be able to do these kinds of things is to use inheritance and override. So cool, we'll just inherit and override because we just have to change one little thing, right? So what's broke, guys? You can't override classes. Yeah, it's funny. We've got someone up here in the front row that's kind of nodding like, yep, been there, done that. The cool thing is you get quick feedback. You don't have to sit there. And this is a silent bug. It doesn't error at all. It just fails. You just get into situations like, where's my package? I told you to install. This is why testing matters. These types of examples are why the developers are so heavy on unit testing. It's to catch the little bugs before you deploy it to production and test it. Or even Vagrant. I mean, think about how long it takes, even if you're running VMware, even if you're running on an SSD, it still takes 2 to 3 minutes to stand up a new Vagrant box. If I can do that, let's assume our test suite takes forever to run and it takes 15 seconds to run, I'm still getting a huge benefit by doing this. The other thing is guys, this is documentation. It's available to everyone. And I can't stress that enough. The app-specific things, these little gotchas, by testing for them, you're going to help the people that come after you. And more importantly, you're going to be able to help your junior people on the team. When I go make a change to my web app, to httpd.conf, and it pulls out, so my favorite example of this, just kind of taking an aside on this, my favorite example is I've got sites that require multi-views. I had no idea what multi-views did. I just figured, oh, it's it's one of those extra just boilerplate things. I'm just going to pull it out because fewer parameters is better, right? Well, yeah. You find out really the hard way that all of a sudden the site stopped working because that multi-views parameter that no one else on the ops team, because I asked, I was like, hey guys, can I just remove this? Like, do we need it? They're like, no, why would we need multi-views? What does that even do? Okay, cool, we'll remove it. By adding tests, you provide documentation for the people that come later. You can, I'll pull up that test code just a second. You can do cool things like, in the it, if you do it and then quotes, you can write a string that will output when your tests go to give an idea of, hey, this is why we're testing for this. And once again, the idea is we just don't want to break production, and we want to be able to iterate faster. You don't want to have to question what broke and why did it break. This gives hints to the people that come later, or even yourself, because Lord knows I've come back to configs 6 months later, and it's like, oh, why the hell did I do that? Oh, this is dumb. Oh, crap. You get the idea. So what's next? Integration testing. That's what we really wanted to begin with, right? We want to actually see if, and I'm going to use a chef term because I think it works and makes sense. We want to know if our Puppet catalog converges. We want to know when we ran Puppet apply, did the system converge? Did it actually output what we expected? So let's take a little preview. And once again, these are just simple examples of this. Oh, I forgot. Continuous integration. And we saw a little bit of that in the previous presentation. They've been talking about it a lot. Yay, Jenkins. And we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so preview. This is so cool, it is not even funny. It took me literally less than 10 minutes to write. You have to make a little bit of change to the spec helper code for the system side because I have to tell it about my fixtures. Big surprise there. But really simple. We're describing the SSH module. The class should converge. When I do Puppet apply class SSH, it should exit 0. It should work. So, did it exit with a 1? No. And I believe the refresh, if my memory serves me correctly, causes it to run twice. So you actually, how many times have you done a Puppet apply? Cool, it worked. And then you run Puppet apply again. Why the hell is it restarting that service again? Well, once again, going back, aging me a bit, I can remember the days when it by default didn't assume the init script has status. So you want to run it again to make sure that you're not restarting Apache every single time. Finally, we're going to use a technology called server spec, because what I'm showing you isn't really rspec system. It's like 6 gems, including rspec system puppet, server spec. I haven't quite nailed down exactly what you need yet, so as I said, this is kind of a preview instead of a tutorial. But server spec is a really neat technology. It gives you the ability to assert things about your system. So we're testing SSH, right? Is SSH actually enabled? So will it start the next time? Because I've made that mistake. And is it running? Yes. After we ran our Puppet apply, it was still running. And Jenkins, this is my favorite. We've actually had an intern this year. Just want to give a big shout out. So mentor people, guys. Be out there for the junior admins. The guy that is part of, there are like 3 people, and one of the people that is the reason I'm standing in this room is here with me today. Can we give a big round of applause? Because I just want to say thank you for all those people that are mentoring, that are giving junior admins an opportunity to become part of our community. So just a big round of applause to those people. So I gave my junior admin a task. I said, okay, so we've undertook recently. the people that came before me did some really interesting things with Puppet. We decided that it was time to just do a rewrite. And as part of that rewrite, we tasked the junior admin with go write tests. You get Puppet, you get tests, write it. And he's done a phenomenal job. So Matt, if you're watching, thank you. I now have all sorts of status. Every single one of these line items is a module. And I'm testing and asserting basic things about those modules to make sure that they are actually passing tests. Finally, questions, guys. What can I tell you? What craziness can I impart? What things would you like to know?
So you showed the SSH config. What if you're using something like a GS to create or to change their SSH config, or maybe using a cat module to build it out of export resources?
Okay, so the question becomes, what if you're using, I'm not familiar with the GS2, but a concat module is a good example. You're going to have to check the snippet, I believe, because I think that you're actually going to have to verify the actual resource type that gets instantiated, because it's one of the reasons that you can't test. So if you used the source parameter, you can't actually test that or the contents of that file because it's not part of the catalog. So if you ever have real questions about that, the best thing to do is output the catalog and go look at what the catalog looks like, and that's how you have to test it. Other questions, guys?
What if you have certain ordering of the systems that you need to run? For example, systems, how do you test that?
So the question is, what if you have system level ordering that you need to test? So I'm guessing you're talking about first you need to stand up the database server, then you need to stand up the web server, and then you need to stand up the proxy. I don't know where the state of that testing is at the moment. That's a really good question, and my talk isn't focused on testing that level. The person I would hit up is Carl, or is Eric still in the room? Okay, he's not in the room. Or Eric, and find out how they're doing it, because that's not something we're currently testing. And I'm zoning on his name, but the gentleman that gave the first talk in this room earlier this morning probably has some good answers for that. So the question is, any experiences with Cucumber Puppet? I'm going to be honest. I looked at Cucumber and was like, oh my God, I'm going to run the other way as fast as possible. A little bit of a side note about me. I kind of sort of pretend to be a Rubyist on the side. I'm not, but I follow what's going on in the Ruby community. Thank you, Puppet. Cucumber is just, every time I've looked at it, I've been like, oh my God. So that's a personal thing. I'm sure someone at least may have some ideas about it. And if not, you should pick up and help maintain it, because that's what open source is all about. All right, guys, what other crazy things you got for me? I think that's it. So I think break is next, so coffee time. And thank you, guys.